Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolute devastation of the recent earthquake in Colombia. We're going to unpack the immediate impacts, the rescue efforts happening right this second, and the deeper structural realities. Basically, why some areas fell while others remain standing. It's a complex, incredibly fast-moving situation, so let's break down exactly what you need to know.
So let's start right off the bat with the most critical figure here, 7.4. That is a staggering magnitude. This earthquake struck a massive area across the western part of the country, severely affecting the coffee-growing region and hitting multiple major cities.
But, before we get lost in the broad logistics and the data, we absolutely have to ground this massive event in the actual human experience. To really grasp this, picture the timeline. Regular Colombians had just wrapped up a long weekend. They wake up on Monday morning, they're simply making their coffee, getting ready for work, and then this tremor hits, abruptly changing everything. And it lasted for 2 whole minutes. Now, 2 full minutes of intense shaking feels like an absolute eternity when you're trapped inside a building. And to make that anxiety even worse, Colombians had actually just felt strong aftershocks from a Venezuelan earthquake recently. So that seismic fear was already lingering right there in the back of their minds before their own ground even started tearing apart.
Let's move to Section 1, a nation shaken.
When we contrast the overall national toll directly with the concentrated devastation in the city of Cali, the sheer gravity of the situation really sinks in. Nationwide, the death toll has quickly shot up to at least 224 people, with nearly 600 injured. But take a look at the localized impact in Cali, which is Colombia's third largest city. In just this one city alone, 90 people are confirmed dead, and 30 entire buildings have completely collapsed. And honestly, perhaps the most alarming figure, almost 300 people are reported missing in Cali alone. It's a stark illustration of how a national-scale disaster can hyper-concentrate its tragedy into very specific urban centers.
And the ripple effects of a 7.4 magnitude quake go way beyond just collapsed buildings. Immediate disruptions have essentially crippled regional infrastructure across the West. Vital roads are totally blocked by debris and huge cracks. Telecommunications have been severely disrupted, which makes coordinating any sort of help incredibly hard. Actually, the logistical strain is so severe right now that commercial flights have been outright canceled at some airports. Why? Because those airports have had to pivot entirely to serve exclusively as emergency rescue hubs. The normal flow of life and commerce has completely ground to a halt.
Which brings us to Section 2, the rescue mission.
The layers of this rapid response are actually remarkable. Step 1 starts at the very top. Colombia's new president, who was inaugurated just days prior to this event, was immediately thrust into his first major crisis. He declared a state of emergency and rapidly mobilized government resources, personally visiting the hardest-hit areas like Pereira, Cali, and Chocó. Step 2, we're seeing an immediate international response. The US, Mexico, and Ecuador stepped right up to offer vital aid. But Step 3 is where you see the real heart of the rescue. On the ground, it isn't just soldiers, police, and firefighters. Dozens, even hundreds of ordinary citizens are literally lining up at rescue sites to pitch in, digging through the rubble by hand to help their fellow Colombians. But the reality at those specific rescue sites is incredibly grim. Teams are working around the clock at completely collapsed buildings, staring down smashed windows and deep piles of rubble. And at these sites, they experience these tense, entirely heartbreaking moments where absolute, total silence is demanded from everyone. The heavy machinery shuts off, the crowds quiet down, and the rescuers just listen intently for the faintest sounds of missing loved ones trapped underneath. It's a chilling reminder of the life and death stakes playing out minute by minute.
Next up is Section 3, built for the quake. Zooming out from the immediate rescue for a second, let's ask a broader question. Why did some buildings completely collapse, while others stood firm? Well, Colombia is geographically prone to high seismic activity. Because of this, a lot of their buildings are specifically designed to withstand a certain amount of shock. When we compare Colombia's architectural and engineering prep against neighboring Venezuela, the contrast is sharp. Venezuela recently suffered an earthquake that caused much greater relative damage, and that was largely due to a lack of these specific engineering safeguards. So this preparedness really explains why the damage in Colombia, while undeniably tragic, wasn't exponentially more catastrophic. The engineering absolutely saved lives. However, we have to look at the limits of that preparation, right? Because despite this relative national readiness, critical public infrastructure still failed. In Cali alone, like we mentioned, around 30 buildings completely collapsed. But beyond residential spaces, highly vulnerable public infrastructure took a massive hit. Hospitals, which are obviously desperately needed right now, suffered significant damage. Schools have been compromised, and various other public buildings have been rendered unsafe. It really goes to show that even in a structurally prepared nation, the sheer violent force of a 7.4 quake will eventually find the vulnerabilities in your infrastructure.
This leads us to our final section, the information divide.
We are seeing a massive information inequality dividing the country right now, and it really underscores the harsh socioeconomic realities of natural disasters. On one side, you have prosperous, developed cities like Cali and Pereira. Here, residents are aggressively utilizing social media, which is an incredibly powerful tool, to get images out, share phone numbers, and track down missing loved ones. The information flow is strong. On the other side, though, you have impoverished rural regions like Choco deep in the rainforest. Because of lower levels of development, their infrastructure was far more vulnerable to the quake and was basically wiped out. Consequently, almost zero information is coming out of these areas. It has literally become an information black hole. We cannot see the extent of their suffering because the digital tools simply aren't there.
So to wrap up our explainer today, we really must consider a provocative question. As international aid pours in and rescue efforts continue around the clock, how will this glaring information divide affect the long-term recovery in Colombia's poorest regions? If a region is a digital black hole, how do rescue coordinators even know what to send or who needs saving? It forces us to realize that long-term socioeconomic disparities might ultimately dictate who gets immediate help and who is tragically left in the dark. Keep this question in mind as this crisis continues to unfold, and thank you so much for joining me to unpack this today.